Merci Jean et merci Nagio. C'est un vidéo tellement inspirant. I feel really proud to be Canadian when I see that video. And I think about how important it is that we're all coming together today in Montreal. There's someone who knows better than anyone how important it is to protect our nature. It's someone who I've had the chance to work extremely closely with, who has always pushed me, who's always had my back, and who's always understood that this is protecting nature. It's not just for us, it's for future generations. C'est le Premier Ministre du Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. He appointed me the first ever Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Alors, la première ministre de l'Environnement et des Changements Climatiques au Canada. And that was really important because he wanted to make a point that we needed to link the environment and climate change. When he did it, I almost fell off my chair. And then he told me that I was off to COP21 because Canada had to be pushing for ambition. Then I actually had to ask someone what's a COP, so Conference of the Parties, and then I immediately banned acronyms. But he was there. He was there for the Paris Agreement. He has been there since. He's someone, though, who also just understands the value of nature. I'm an avid canoeist, but I will tell you, he could beat me in a canoe. That's for sure. And he's always linked the agendas. He understands that it's not just about climate change, it's not just about nature, it's not just about oceans, that it's really what we value, what we love, and that in Canada we have an extra special responsibility to protect it. I'll give you one story before he comes on. We went to Rouge National Urban Park, Canada's first national urban park. We managed to expand it. It was a great day. It's an amazing place. 7 million people have access to it by public transportation. We've worked with the Indigenous peoples to do this, also farmers, environmentalists, bringing folks together. And we were out in a canoe. And I was in my canoe. I had my daughter, and I look over, the Prime Minister's in the canoe with his wife, Madame Sophie Grégoire Trudeau. And I look in the backdrop, and I see his security guys. And I was like, wait, why are they going in circles in the canoe? And I realized, and I love our security guys, but they were not canoeists. And I thought, okay, this is going to be really, really awkward. And I was thinking, okay, if I have to save them, okay, they're pretty big, how am I going to do this? And I looked over to the Prime Minister, and he wasn't very proud. And he had a twinkle in his eye. And I know he was saying, I've got this. So without further ado, an avid canoeist, committed guardian of nature, someone who understands in the 21st century the environment and the economy have to go together, Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau.
Merci tout le monde. Bonjour. Merci Catherine pour cette belle introduction et merci pour tout ton travail. But plastic is showing up in our lakes that used to be pristine. Natural habitats are disappearing, and wildlife populations are half of what they were in the 1970s. We can't afford to ignore these realities. We can't wait for other people or other generations to do something about it. It's up to Canada to act. With a quarter of the globe's boreal forests and the longest coastline in the world, this is a fight that Canada has to lead. Because Canadians are already seeing the costs. Farmers' crops are being destroyed by droughts. Every summer, wildfires threaten people's businesses, and homes are getting washed out by floods. Something that families here in Quebec and across Eastern Canada faced just this past weekend. Canada is warming at nearly twice the global rate, and even faster in our north. But the opposition denies that climate change is real, and look no further than Ontario to find a provincial government that's wasting taxpayers' money fighting climate action in court while ignoring their commitments to protect species at risk. It's short-sighted and irresponsible, and frankly, Canadians deserve better. That's why, after a decade of inaction under the previous government, our government committed to making real progress to protect and preserve nature across Canada. We're protecting nature in our cities, too, like the Rouge Park in the Greater Toronto Area. This is Canada's first ever national urban park and the largest in North America. My friends, we're on the right track, but we know that there is so much more to be done. Our government is working with Inuit leaders and the government of Nunavut on a marine conservation area in the high Arctic basin, and we're moving forward in creating Thaidene National Park Reserve. And there's no doubt that we're making progress. But we can't do this work alone. It's not enough to just have scientists and nature conservationists talking to each other about how to protect our water, air, and land. Real change happens when this is something that everyone is thinking about, whether it's folks picking up their kids from school or people waiting in line at the grocery store. Every single person can and must be a part of the solution. Protecting nature and tackling climate change is the challenge of our generation. And people like the kids from St. Aloysius School in Kitchener are counting on us to lead. Last month, they wrote me about the importance of fighting climate change and investing in solutions like renewable energy. Glenn, in grade 7, says, "If we don't do something soon, it could get worse and worse and worse, and this is why we should save the Earth's power. You gotta think about it." Kyle ends his letter by asking me, do you want your children to live in a world full of pollution, or should they continue the path of evolution? And Bella says, "I'm sorry to put all the pressure on you, but if you can, could you share this with the UN? It would save everyone if you do." My friends, it's not just Glenn, Kyle, and Bella who are relying on us. It's everyone of every age, from young people halfway around the globe to farmers right here at home. Our government is ready to keep leading, and I know you are too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Merci.
Alors, un grand merci au Premier ministre. C'est un grand champion de la nature. Moi, je suis très fière de servir sur l'équipe avec tout ce qu'on fait pour avancer nos attaques au changement climatique, mais aussi pour protéger la nature. Mr. Guilbeault, Stephen Guilbeault, is incredibly well known. He's someone who is a leading environmentalist who's been working for generations. He has also been called one of the world's top 50 players in sustainable development. And now he's serving in a very special role to help advise our government on climate action, looking at how do we accelerate action, how do we do better in the transportation sector, how we get around, and how we build buildings, but also how do we leverage the resources, including from the private sector, to move to a lower carbon economy and also ensure that everyone is part of it. So thank you, Stephen Guilbeault. I'm looking forward to have you conversation with the Prime Minister. There he is, Stephen Guilbeault. Merci.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Prime Minister, thank you for being with us. For many people in Canada, and Catherine and others have talked about how this is something that this is very entrenched in you. It's not something that you started paying attention to when you were elected to Parliament. But not everybody knows that. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about where this passion for nature protection comes from.
It comes from, like so many Canadians growing up, in a country where going and playing outside was fundamental to our daily lives, it seemed. I mean, I reflect a lot on what being an environmentalist means these days as opposed to what it meant a generation ago or more. I mean, if you want to think about the environment today, we spend a lot of time focusing on climate change, but in the past, focusing on the environment meant creating national parks, and my dad did a lot of that, and because of that, I got to travel around to so many incredible places, from the Parc La Mauricie to Wilberforce Falls to camping and canoeing in Algonquin Park and elsewhere. And this summer, we're sending our kids off to camp for the first time, and canoe camp for the first time, our 10 and 11-year-olds. And it was absolutely shocking to me to realize that now, I mean, as for many of us when we were kids, paddling, if you were thirsty, you'd take your cup, you'd dip it into one of the lakes in Algonquin Park, and you just drink from it, and that was it. And you can't camp pretty much anywhere in Canada anymore where you're not packing your trusty MEC filter. It's just part of the way things are done, and for me, that's something that we've lost and that my kids have lost in not simply being able to take for granted that the country with the largest reserves of fresh water in the world, you can't actually drink much of that fresh water straight when you're out there in nature and trying to connect with the world. And that, for me, is a real loss. And as much as we are continuing to focus on climate change, I'm really excited about the fact that we get to talk about nature writ large. We get to talk about those extraordinary places. I see Harvey Locke here, and we were involved in 2003, when I was getting my start as a public advocate on many things, as an environmentalist, as in the campaign to protect the Nahanni National Park Reserve, which was expanded from basically a river protection that had been done 40 years ago to now protecting almost the entire watershed. And that kind of engagement is something that I've been involved in all my life and are going to continue to. And that's why our reaching of our targets of 10% of marine protected and 17% of land protected by next year is something that has been so important to this government, and why we're going to continue to do it.
And thanks to those national parks, my wife and I were able to do our honeymoon in one of those national parks in Mingan Island, kayaking just a few years ago. You just touched on that, but before you got into politics, you were an environmental activist. You were involved in some of the issues we're talking about, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Well, I mean, my background, as my political opponents certainly like to emphasize, was as a snowboard instructor and a mountain guide and a whitewater river guide and a camp counselor, which was said with sort of dripping venom in attack ads.
All roads lead to Rome.
Well, I don't know. I have a whole thing about the leadership skills that you develop at 17 years old trying to handle a group of 12-year-olds, but in nature. But like, my path has always kept me outside and across this country and engaged in so many different ways, and it led me to a deep appreciation. And one of the early organizations I got involved, I was involved in avalanche safety and avalanche awareness after my brother's death in an avalanche in Kokanee Provincial Park in BC, but I also got involved through a dear old friend of my father's and a mentor of mine, Jim Coots, in the Nature Conservancy of Canada. I got involved in deepening my appreciation when I went back to school in my early 30s to do a master's degree in environmental geography right here at the McGill School of the Environment. So there was a number of, I didn't quite finish my thesis because I got distracted and headed into politics, but the opportunity to really dig into what I felt was the biggest issue of the time, which for me involves, yes, protecting nature and protecting our environment, but it actually mostly involves a fundamental shift away from the short-term thinking that has led us to the kinds of success we've had as a civilization. I mean, we have a set of instincts and actions that have driven us towards this success because